Please don't hurt me. I can't move. Those 5 words whispered from cracked, bleeding lips stopped a man who hadn't stopped for anything in 6 years. Jake Reaper Morrison hadn't saved a soul in his entire life. He'd broken things, people, promises. He'd left a trail of wreckage across 3 states and never once looked back. But this moment, this girl, this road, this silence was about to change everything he thought he knew about himself. If this story moves you, hit subscribe, drop a comment with the city you're watching from. I want to see how far this story travels. Now stay with me. Every second of this is worth it. The engine of Jake Morrison's 1998 Harley-Davidson Road King had a sound that people remembered long after he was gone. It wasn't just loud, it was a warning. A deep rolling thunder that said, move aside, stay out of my way, don't make this complicated. And for 6 years on and off Highway 49, nobody ever had to be told twice. Jake was 44 years old and looked like 58. Not because he was weak, the man was built like a refrigerator wrapped in leather, but because life had carved its signature into his face the hard way. Every scar had a story. Every line around his eyes was a debt he still owed. He hadn't slept more than 4 hours in a single stretch since 2018, and he'd stopped trying to remember why. He was 3 hours out of Barstow, California, pushing west on a flat gray morning with nothing but scrub brush and silence for company when his rear tire hit something on the shoulder of the road, and he instinctively looked down. What he saw made him brake. Not a gradual slowdown, a full skidding, gravel-spitting stop. Because 20 feet behind him, barely visible in the dead brush at the road's edge, was a hand. Just a hand, small, pale, reaching upward like it was trying to grab hold of something that wasn't there. Jake sat on his bike for 3 full seconds without moving. Keep going, said the part of him that had kept him alive this long. Not your problem, not your world. You don't do this anymore. He got off the bike. He didn't know why. He would think about that moment for the rest of his life, why his boots hit that gravel, why his legs carried him toward that hand instead of away from it, and he would never have a clean answer. Some things don't have answers. Some things just happen, and you either follow them or you don't, and the choice defines you in ways you don't find out about until much later. She was lying on her back about 3 feet off the shoulder, half hidden by a collapsed section of scrub brush that had probably taken the brunt of whatever impact had put her there. She was young, maybe 19, maybe 20, with dark hair matted across her face and a cut along her left temple that had bled heavily and then dried brown. Her left arm was extended above her head, reaching, and her right arm was pressed tight against her ribs like she was holding herself together. She heard his boots before she saw him. He knew that because her whole body went rigid. Hey! Jake stopped 6 feet away. He crouched down slowly, deliberately, the way you'd move around a cornered animal. Hey, I'm not going to hurt you. Her head turned. One eye was swollen, nearly shut. The other found him, and what he saw in that eye, pure animal terror, hit him somewhere behind his sternum with a force he wasn't prepared for. Please. Her voice was barely there. Cracked. Dry. Like she'd been screaming for a long time before she gave up on it. Please don't hurt me, I can't move. Jake had heard a lot of things in his life. He'd heard men beg. He'd heard men lie. He'd heard people say words they didn't mean and mean things they'd never say out loud. But he had never heard anything in his life that landed quite like those 6 words delivered in that specific broken whisper from a girl who clearly had no reason left to believe that anything coming toward her would be anything other than another source of pain. I'm not going to hurt you, he said again, and this time he meant it with every single part of himself. My name's Jake. I'm going to call for help. Can you tell me your name? She stared at him. She was assessing him. He could see it running the same kind of rapid, exhausted threat calculation that he himself ran every time he walked into a room he didn't control. Old habit, survival habit. Emma, she finally said. Emma, he nodded. Okay. Emma, I need to know, can you feel your legs? A pause, her jaw tightened. Yes, I can't make them work right. I think I hit something. I don't know. I don't know what happened. How long have you been out here? Her one good eye filled with something not tears exactly, more like the memory of tears, the place where tears go when you've already cried them all. I don't know, a long time. Cars went by. Nobody stopped. Jake felt something move through him like a current. He pulled out his phone. No signal. Of course there was no signal. This was the dead stretch, the long nothing between Barstow and the junction where the towers gave up and the desert won. He'd known that. He'd been counting on it actually because it meant no one could reach him out here. Now it meant no one could reach him out here. Okay, he said. Here's what I'm going to do. I'm going to get my first aid kit from my saddlebag. I'm going to check you over for anything serious, and then I'm going to get you to a hospital. Does that sound okay to you? Emma looked at him for a long moment. You're with the angels, she said. It wasn't a question. She was looking at the ink on his forearms, old ink, faded but specific. The kind of specific that people who grew up around motorcycle clubs recognized instantly. Jake held her gaze. Used to be, not anymore. What does that mean? It means I'm just a guy who stopped when nobody else did. He stood up. Don't go anywhere. It was a stupid thing to say, and he knew it the moment it left his mouth. The girl literally could not move. But she let out a sound that might, under other circumstances, have been the ghost of a laugh. And for Jake Morrison, who had not made anyone laugh, not genuinely, not warmly, and longer than he could remember, that tiny, broken, barely there sound did something to him. He got his kit. He came back. He got to work. She had 3 cracked ribs, he was pretty sure about that, based on the way she reacted when he gently pressed along her right side. The cut on her temple was ugly, but not dangerous. Her left knee was badly swollen, which explained the legs, and she had abrasions up both arms consistent with someone who had rolled or been thrown. She was dehydrated. Her lips were cracked. She had dried blood under her fingernails that didn't match the color of her own wounds. Jake filed that last detail away without commenting on it. He gave her water from his bottle, tilted carefully because she couldn't lift her own head without his hand behind it. She drank like someone who had forgotten what water tasted like. She closed her eyes when she swallowed, and for a moment her face went completely still, and he could see what she must have looked like before whatever had happened to her had happened, before the bruising and the fear and the long hours in the desert heat. She looked like someone's daughter. He shook that thought off hard. Who did this to you? He asked. He kept his voice neutral, professional, the way a paramedic asks, not as accusation, just as information. Emma's eye opened. Does it matter? It matters to me. She studied him again, that calculating stillness. You don't know me. No, Jake agreed. I don't, but you're bleeding, and I'm the only person here, so I'm going to ask again. A silence. The wind moved through the brush. Somewhere far off, a truck passed on the highway with a sound like distant thunder. His name is Dolan, she said finally. The name came out flat, like she'd said it so many times in her own head that it had stopped being a word and become something else, a shape, a weight. Marcus Dolan. He said I stole from him. I didn't steal anything. I tried to leave and She stopped. He made an example of me. Jake went very still. Where is he now? I don't know. She turned her head slightly, just enough to look at him sideways. Why, just making sure he's not about to come back and complicate my morning. He thinks I'm dead, Emma said. He left me here because he thought. She stopped again, swallowed. He said the desert would finish what he started. Something cold settled into Jake's expression. Not anger, he'd moved past anger as a primary emotion years ago. What settled in was older and quieter and more dangerous than anger. It was clarity, the specific laser-focused clarity of a man who had spent a decade making very bad decisions and had spent the last 6 months trying to figure out who he was without all of them. Emma, he said carefully, is Marcus Dolan connected to anyone I would know about? She looked at him, crimson wolves. The world didn't tilt. Jake was too disciplined for that, but something shifted beneath him like a fault line moving. The Crimson Wolves, his old club. The club he'd walked away from 6 months ago after 22 years, after a decision had been made at a vote he'd refused to participate in, and a line had been crossed that he couldn't unsee, and he'd packed his things at 2 a.m. and ridden west and never said goodbye to anyone. He hadn't expected them to follow him here. Not to this road, not to this moment. How do you know that name? He asked. Because Dolan runs their Southwest operation, Emma said. Because I was his girlfriend for 8 months before I figured out what they were doing. Because I tried to walk away, And he said nobody walks away. A pause. Sound familiar? Jake looked at her for a long moment. Yeah, he said quietly. It does. Getting Emma onto his bike was not a simple operation. She was right that she couldn't walk. Her knee had swollen badly enough that bearing weight was out, and her ribs meant that any significant movement needed to be slow and deliberate. He laid out his bedroll on the ground beside her and talked her through it. Roll to your left, use your arms. That's it, easy, I've got you. And she followed his instructions with a gritted teeth determination that told him she had survived things before and knew how to push through pain when she had to. When he got his arms under her and lifted her fully off the ground, she made a sound, a sharp, involuntary sound of pain that cut him somewhere he didn't expect. He held her steady and waited. I'm okay, she said. It came out tight, forced. I'm okay, keep going. I'm going to set you on the seat and I need you to lean forward against me when we're moving. Can you do that? Yes. If you feel like you're going to pass out, you tell me and I'll stop. I don't care where we are. She turned her face toward him just slightly. She was very close. Her one good eye was dark brown, and in it, Jake saw something that surprised him. Not gratitude, not relief, but curiosity. Like she was looking at him the way you look at something that doesn't fit the category you expected it to fit. Why are you doing this? She asked. He thought about that. He thought about several answers, the easy ones, the deflections, the shrugs he'd perfected over decades of not wanting to explain himself to anyone. Because nobody else did, he finally said. The same thing he'd said before, but this time it wasn't deflection. This time it was the actual truth. Emma nodded slowly. Okay, she said. Okay. He got her on the bike. 40 minutes of riding at half speed, watching her in his mirror every 30 seconds, making sure her grip on his jacket didn't loosen. She held on. He'd expected her to fade. She was injured, dehydrated. Probably running on nothing but adrenaline and stubbornness, but she held on with both hands and kept her head up, and he felt something like respect for that without quite having a name for it. The first gas station with a working payphone because, of course it was a payphone because this was the desert and the 20th century was still stubbornly hanging on out here, was a place called Ray's Quick Stop at the junction of 49 and County Road 7. Jake knew it. He'd stopped there before. Ray himself was behind the counter, a 70-year-old man with a hearing aid and no interest in other people's business, which suited Jake perfectly. He helped Emma inside and settled her on a wooden bench near the door. He called 911 from the payphone. He gave them their location, described Emma's injuries, and when the dispatcher asked for his name, he hesitated for exactly 1 second. Morrison, he said. Jake Morrison. He hung up before she could ask anything else. When he came back in, Emma was watching him with that same sideways assessment. They're going to want to know what happened, she said. When the police come. Yeah. And I'm going to have to tell them about Dolan. Yeah. Which means Dolan is going to find out I'm not dead. A pause. And he's going to find out someone helped me. Jake sat down on the bench next to her. He leaned forward, elbows on his knees, and looked at the floor. Ray was pretending to read a newspaper behind the counter with absolutely no interest in the two of them, which Jake appreciated. Emma, he said, how much do you know about the wolves, about what they're running? Enough, she said quietly. Way too much. He turned his head and looked at her. She met his eyes. Is that why he wanted you dead? Jake asked. Not because you ran, because you know too much. Emma didn't answer. She didn't have to. Jake straightened up. He was quiet for a moment, and when he spoke again, his voice was different, lower, more careful with an edge to it that hadn't been there before. How long ago did you leave? 4 days. 4 days in the desert. I had water for the first 2. She said it matter-of-factly. No self-pity. It was a statement of logistics, not suffering. Jake stared at her. You've been out there for 4 days. I was moving at night mostly. I had a map. I was trying to get to the junction. She glanced at the payphone. I was close, Oitis. Yeah, Jake said. You were. The sound of a distant siren began to thread through the heat. Maybe 10 minutes out, maybe less. Jake turned to look at Emma again. She was sitting very still, staring at the door, and he could see the precise moment when the calculation happened, when she ran the math on what came next. Police report, statement, name in the system, Dolan finding out, everything that followed from that. Her jaw tightened, her hands folded in her lap, pressed together until her knuckles went white. Hey, Jake said. She looked at him. You made it 4 days across open desert alone with broken ribs and no water to get to this junction. He held her gaze. You're not going to fall apart now. Emma looked at him for a long time. The sirens were getting louder. You don't know anything about me, she said. It was the same thing she'd said before back on the road. No, Jake said, but I'm starting to. The door opened. The paramedics came in, and Jake Morrison, who had spent 6 years telling himself he had nothing left to give and no one worth giving it to, stood up and stayed exactly where he was. He was still there 3 hours later in the waiting area of Desert Valley Regional Hospital when a nurse came out and told him that Emma was stable, that her knee was going to need surgery, that her ribs would heal, that she was going to be okay. He sat with that information for a minute. Then he pulled out his phone full signal here in the hospital and saw 3 missed calls from a number he recognized. A number he hadn't seen in 6 months. A number belonging to a man named Victor Reyes, who was the road captain of the Crimson Wolves Southwest chapter and the closest thing Jake had ever had to a real friend inside that life. Jake stared at those missed calls. Then he put his phone back in his pocket, stood up, and went to find out what room they'd put Emma in. Whatever Victor wanted, it could wait. Everything else could wait. Emma's room was on the 2nd floor at the end of a hallway that smelled like antiseptic and recycled air. Jake found it by asking the front desk nurse twice and then ignoring her suggestion that he wait downstairs because visiting hours didn't start until 3. He walked past her before she finished the sentence. She called after him. He kept walking. The door was half open. He stopped in the doorway without going in. Emma was awake. She was sitting up against the pillow at a slight angle, her left knee elevated under a brace and IV line running into her right arm. Someone had cleaned her face and the cut on her temple had been properly closed with 3 small stitches. The swelling around her eye had deepened to a dark purple, but the eye itself was open now. Both of them, and Jake got his first real look at her without the desert and the fear and the urgent mechanics of survival in the way. She was looking at the ceiling. She didn't hear him yet, and in that unguarded moment before she knew she was being watched, he saw something on her face that stopped him cold. It wasn't pain. It wasn't exhaustion. It was the expression of someone who was doing arithmetic in their head, running numbers on a problem that didn't have a good solution, and who already knew it. He knew that expression. He'd worn it himself for most of his adult life. He knocked on the open door. Emma's eyes dropped from the ceiling to him, and her whole face shifted not to relief, not to warmth, but to a kind of careful neutrality that told him she'd spent a long time learning how to make her face say nothing. You're still here, she said. Told you I would be. You didn't actually tell me that. Jake thought about it. Implied it. She looked at him for a moment and then very carefully moved herself a few inches upright. He watched her jaw tighten with the effort and resisted the instinct to move forward and help. She hadn't asked for help. He'd learned a long time ago that offering help to someone who hadn't asked was just another way of taking something from them. The police already came, she said. I know. I talked to the detective downstairs. Hendricks. Emma's expression shifted slightly. You talked to him. He wanted to know how I found you. I told him. Jake moved to the chair beside the bed and sat. He also wanted to know if I had a prior relationship with Marcus Dolan or the Crimson Wolves. I told him the truth about that too. Emma was very still. What is the truth? That I was a member for 22 years and walked away 6 months ago. He held her gaze. That I left because of a vote I refused to be part of. That I haven't had contact with any member since. He paused. Until this morning when I got 3 missed calls from their road captain. The air in the room changed. Emma's good hand, the one without the IV, pressed flat against the blanket. Victor Reyes called you. You know Victor. I know everyone Dolan knows. She said it like it was a curse. Did you call him back? No. You need to, Emma said. Not because he's your friend. Because if Victor is calling you, it means Dolan already knows you were on that road. It means someone saw you stop. Jake looked at her. That's not possible. There was no one for 20 miles in either direction. There's always someone. Emma's voice had gone flat and certain in the way that only comes from being wrong about that exact thing before. Dolan has people everywhere on that corridor. It's how he runs his operation. 2 or 3 guys just parked at different points watching traffic. They don't look like anything. They're just there. She paused. How long ago did those calls come in? Jake pulled out his phone, looked at the timestamps. First one was about 40 minutes after I found you. Second and third within the next hour. Emma closed her eyes. When she opened them again, something had settled in her face. Not resignation, but the kind of hard, clear-eyed focus that comes when someone has run out of the luxury of being afraid and has to start being smart instead. They tracked your plates, she said, or someone got a visual. Either way, Dolan knows a biker stopped on that stretch of 49 around the time he left me. He doesn't know it's you yet, or Victor wouldn't be calling, he'd be sending someone. A breath. But he will know. It's a matter of hours. Jake was quiet for a moment. Then he said, what exactly does Dolan think you took from him? Emma's eyes didn't move. I didn't take anything. I know that's what you told me. I'm asking what he thinks. A long pause. Long enough that Jake started to understand it wasn't hesitation, it was calculation. She was deciding how much to tell him and why and what it would cost her. There's a ledger, she said finally. Not a physical one, digital. An encrypted file with the names of every law enforcement contact the Wolves have bought off in the Southwest. Every judge, every deputy, every city councilman who's taken money to look the other way goes back 12 years. She let that sit for a second. I have it. The chair creaked as Jake leaned forward. Emma. I copied it 8 months ago, 2 weeks after Dolan first showed it to me. Didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew I needed something in case I ever had to run. She met his eyes steadily. Turns out I was right. Jake stood up. He walked to the window and stood with his back to her for a moment, not looking at anything, just processing. Then he turned around. Where is it? Safe. Is it on a device, a drive cloud storage? Safe, she repeated, and her voice had a quality that told him that was the only answer he was getting on that question right now. He accepted it. He came back and sat down. Okay. Does Dolan know for certain that you have it, or does he suspect? He knows. He found the access log on his own system 3 weeks ago. That's when things changed. Her voice stayed level, but her fingers pressed harder against the blanket. That's when he stopped being someone I was scared of and started being someone who was going to kill me. Jake looked at her bruised face, at the stitches on her temple, at the IV line, and the knee brace and the 3 cracked ribs underneath the hospital gown. He thought about 4 days alone in the desert with no water and a map moving at night. He thought about the dried blood under her fingernails that didn't match her wounds. The blood on your hands, he said, when I found you. Whose was it? Emma didn't flinch. A man named Garrett. He was one of Dolan's. He found me on the second night. A pause. I had a rock. Jake was quiet. He's alive, Emma said. I hit him hard enough to put him down, but I checked his pulse before I ran. He was alive. He'll tell Dolan where he found you. He already has. That's how I know the timeline is short. Her chin lifted slightly. I've been running the math since last night. I've got maybe another 6 hours before Dolan has enough information to start narrowing down which hospital I'm in. Maybe less now that they know a biker stopped on that road. Jake looked at her for a long moment. Then he said something he hadn't planned to say, something that came from a place in him that had been quiet for 6 months and was now apparently done being quiet. Then we can't stay here. Emma stared at him. What? You heard me. You don't, Jake, this isn't your problem. I am not your problem. You stopped. You called for help. That is more than anyone else did. You don't have to. He's going to find you in this hospital, Jake said, with a busted knee and cracked ribs in a room with one exit. And then what? Then I deal with it. With what, a rock? He kept his voice even. No judgment in it, just logistics. Emma, I know what Dolan is. I know what the Wolves do when someone has information that can burn them. I spent 22 years in a world that operates exactly like this, and I know what happens next, and you are not in any position right now to stop it alone. Emma's jaw was tight. I don't know you. You said that already? I mean it. You're a stranger. You used to run with the same people who want me dead. Why are you... She stopped herself. regrouped. Why would you do this? What do you get out of it? Jake thought about Victor's 3 missed calls. He thought about the vote he'd walked out of 6 months ago and what had been decided at that vote, and the thing he'd seen 2 weeks later that confirmed he'd been right to leave. He thought about 22 years of looking the other way and telling himself it wasn't his business and keeping his head down and surviving, and what that accumulation of silence had cost him. Nothing, he said. I don't get anything out of it. That's the point. Emma looked at him for a long time. Outside in the hallway, someone's call button went off, and a nurse walked past the open door briskly without looking in. If I leave this hospital before they clear me, Emma said slowly, I lose the protection of being a documented patient. Dolan's people can't touch me here without witnesses. Can't they? A pause. He put a man in a hospital in Tucson 3 years ago, Emma said quietly. Broad daylight, visiting hours. The nurses saw a man in scrubs they didn't recognize go in and come out, and the patient had a cardiac event that the medical examiner ruled natural causes. She stopped. The patient was 27 years old. Jake said nothing. So no, Emma said. You're right, they can. She pressed her lips together. What are you proposing? I know a place, 2 hours from here off the grid, no connection to me or anyone I've ever run with. I've been staying there for the past 3 months. Nobody knows about it. Nobody. Emma looked at him with that careful, measuring look. He was starting to recognize the one where she was running the odds, calculating trust, trying to determine whether the risk of staying in one place was worse than the risk of moving with someone she barely knew. If this is a play, she said quietly, if you are running something for Dolan or for Victor or for anyone, I'm not. Then you should know that the file I mentioned is time-locked. If I don't input an access code every 48 hours, it automatically forwards to 3 separate recipients, 2 journalists and a federal prosecutor's office. She held his gaze without blinking. So if anything happens to me, the thing Dolan is trying to protect gets released anyway. Jake nodded slowly. Smart. I've had a lot of time to think. When's the next reset? Emma glanced at the small clock above the door. 31 hours from now. Then we need to move before tonight. Jake stood. I need to talk to your doctor and figure out what you need to travel. Can you walk at all? With crutches, maybe. They haven't tested it yet. I'll find crutches. He moved toward the door. Is there anything in this room that belongs to you? Anything you had when they brought you in? A phone. They would have bagged it with my clothes, but it's burned. Dolan's people can trace it. Leave it. He paused in the doorway. Emma, I need you to trust me for the next 2 hours. Not forever. Just 2 hours. She was quiet for a moment. Then, with the air of someone making a calculated bet with imperfect information, which was, Jake recognized the only kind of bet that had ever been available to her, she said 2 hours. He went to find her doctor. What he found instead, stepping off the elevator on the ground floor, was Detective Hendricks waiting for him with a second man Jake didn't recognize. The second man was in plain clothes, good shoes, bad tie, the specific kind of careful, not quite expression that Jake had learned over decades to associate with federal agents. Mr. Morrison, Hendricks said. Got a minute? Jake looked at the second man. Who's he? Special Agent Tran DEA. Hendricks kept his voice low, professionally pleasant. We'd like to talk to you about the young woman upstairs and what you may or may not know about her situation. Jake was still for exactly 1 second. Am I being detained? No, Tran said. You're not. We're asking. Then I'll need to make a call first. Jake reached into his pocket and pulled out his phone. Hendricks and Tran exchanged a glance. Jake dialed. It rang twice. Morrison, Victor Rhea's voice came on the line low, careful, immediately alert. I've been trying to reach you. I know, Jake said, keeping his eyes on the 2 men in front of him. Tell Dolan he needs to stop looking for the girl. Tell him whatever he thinks she has, it's already out of his reach. And the only thing pursuing her is going to accomplish is accelerating his problem. A pause. And Victor, if anyone shows up at Desert Valley Regional in the next 2 hours, the problem gets a lot worse, a lot faster than he's planning for. You understand what I'm telling you. A silence on the line, a long one, Barton. Then Victor said very quietly, Jake, what did you get yourself into? Something I should have gotten into years ago. He hung up. He looked at Tran and Hendricks. Now I'll answer your questions, he said, but I want something in exchange. The girl upstairs needs protective custody starting tonight. Not tomorrow, tonight. Can you make that happen? Tran looked at him with the expression of a man recalibrating rapidly. That depends on what she's willing to tell us. She's willing to tell you a lot, Jake said. 12 years worth. But she needs to know she's safe first. So I'm asking again. Can you make that happen? Tran was quiet for a beat. Then he reached into his jacket and pulled out a card. He held it out to Jake. Get her on the phone, he said, right now, and we'll talk about what's possible. Jake took the card. He looked at it. He looked at the two men in front of him. Then he turned around and pressed the elevator button. Come on then, he said, and you can tell her yourself. The elevator opened. All three of them got in. The doors closed. And somewhere on a stretch of highway 2 hours west, Marcus Dolan's phone rang with news that was about to change his plans significantly. The elevator ride to Emma's floor took 45 seconds. Jake counted them because counting was something to do with the specific coiled tension of standing between a DEA agent and a local detective while the number on the display climbed from 1 to 2. Nobody spoke. Tran was looking at his phone. Hendricks was looking at Jake. Jake was looking at the doors. When they opened, Jake stepped out first and walked the hallway at a pace that made both men move faster than they probably intended to. He knocked once on Emma's half-open door and pushed it the rest of the way. Emma looked at him. Then she looked at the two men behind him. Her face went completely still in that way he was learning to read not blankness, but maximum internal activity hidden behind a controlled surface. Emma, Jake said, this is Detective Hendricks, who you already met, and Special Agent Tran from the DEA. They want to talk to you about the file. He paused. I think you should. Emma's eyes moved to Tran. How much do you already know? Tran stepped forward and pulled the chair from the corner of the room without being invited to, turned it around, and sat with his forearms on the back of it. It was a deliberate move, casual, non-threatening, the kind of body language that gets practiced. We know about Dolan's operation. We've been building a case for 14 months. We know about the payoffs, the corridor, the structure. He held her gaze. What we don't have is documentation. What you're describing, if it's real, is the difference between an indictment and a conviction. It's real? Oh, Emma said. Then I need to understand what you have, how you got it, and where it is. Was quiet for a moment. She looked at Jake not for permission, but for something harder to name, like she was checking whether the ground was still solid. Jake gave her a single small nod and she turned back to Tran. I need immunity, she said. Full immunity, in writing. Before I say another word. Tran didn't hesitate. That's not something I can give you in the next 10 minutes. Then come back when you can. Emma settled back against her pillow with the careful, deliberate movement of someone whose ribs remind them of everything. Because without immunity, the file doesn't help either of us. Hendricks shifted. Miss Emma, you understand that you're in danger right now. That every hour we spend negotiating. I've been in danger for 4 days, Emma said. I'm still here. An hour won't kill me. She looked at Tran again. Make the call. Get me something on paper, then we talk. Tran looked at her for a long moment with the expression of a man who was recalculating and didn't particularly enjoy being put in the position of having to. Then he stood, walked to the window, and made a phone call. Jake stood near the door. Hendricks moved next to him and lowered his voice. How well do you know her? I found her this morning. And then you're already running interference with the DEA on her behalf. I'm making sure she gets what she needs before she gives away the only thing keeping her alive. Jake kept his eyes on the room. Is that a problem? Hendricks looked at him for a beat. You called Victor Reyes downstairs. I caught the name. I know you did. That's a significant call to make, Morrison. Yes, Jake said. It was. Are you going to tell me what you said? I told him to call off whatever he was sending. Whether he does it is up to him. Jake finally looked at Hendricks directly. But Victor Reyes isn't stupid. He knows what a file like Emma's means if it goes public. He'll advise Dolan to stand down. And if Dolan doesn't listen to his road captain, Jake was quiet for a moment. Then we have a different problem. Tran came back from the window. He looked at Emma. I can have a written agreement in front of you within 2 hours. It won't be the full document, that takes longer, but it will be a signed letter from my supervising AUSE. Confirming the terms and binding the office. Emma looked at the ceiling for exactly 2 seconds. Then she looked at Tran. Okay, she said. 2 hours. Tran and Hendricks left. The door swung mostly closed behind them. Jake and Emma were alone in the room again, and the silence that settled was different from the one before, heavier, more complicated, carrying the specific weight of things that had just been set in motion and could not be unset. You think he'll actually deliver? Emma asked. Tran, yeah, he wants this case. You could see it. Jake sat back in the chair. He's been working Dolan for over a year, and you just handed him the finish line. He'll move fast. Emma turned her head and looked at the IV line in her arm. Then she said quietly, I need to reset the timer. Now. I want to do it from a different device, one they can't trace back to the account. She paused. Does this hospital have a business center, computers for public use? I'll find out. Jake stood. You going to be okay for 10 minutes? I've been okay for 4 days without any help at all. The way she said it wasn't sharp, it was just a fact. A line being drawn. Right. He moved toward the door and then stopped. Emma, when Tran comes back and you give him the file, that's the end of your leverage. You understand that? I know. Once he has it, the thing that's been keeping Dolan from escalating disappears. The legal protection kicks in, but legal protection has holes in it, especially with a man who's bought 12 years of law enforcement goodwill. Emma's jaw tightened. You think I haven't thought more about that? I think you've thought about everything, Jake said. I'm just making sure we're thinking about the same things at the same time. A pause. Something shifted in Emma's face, not softening exactly, but a kind of reluctant acknowledgement that they had in fact become a we somewhere in the past 4 hours without either of them deciding to. There's something else in the file, she said. Jake turned back fully. What, besides the payoff records? She met his eyes. There are names of people the Wolves have disappeared over the past 8 years. Not enemies, not rival clubs, witnesses, people who got too close and then stopped existing. She paused. 17 names, 12 of them were listed as cold cases or missing persons in law enforcement databases. Jake was very still. There's a name in there I think you know, Emma said. A woman named Sandra Reeves. She went missing 4 years ago in New Mexico. She was a paralegal who was subpoenaed to testify in a federal racketeering case involving an Albuquerque chapter of the Wolves. Emma watched his face. The case collapsed when she disappeared. Jake's expression had gone somewhere she couldn't quite read. I knew her name, he said. I didn't know what happened to her. Now you do. The weight of that settled over both of them. Jake stood in the doorway and did not move for a long moment, and Emma watched the thing that was happening inside him. The particular kind of reckoning that comes when a person realizes that the institution they were part of was worse than they let themselves believe, and that their silence over the years was a form of participation, whether they meant it that way or not. That's why you walked away, Emma said quietly. 6 months ago, something happened and you finally saw it clearly. Yeah. What was it? He looked at her. A vote about what to do with someone who'd become a liability. He stopped. I voted no. I was the only one who voted no. Another stop. I found out 2 weeks later what they decided. Emma nodded slowly. She didn't ask what they decided. She could read the answer in the geography of his face. I'm sorry, she said. It was a simple thing to say and an unusual thing to hear, and it landed on Jake Morrison with a force that surprised him because he hadn't been expecting it. Nobody had said that to him, not in 6 months of isolation and highway, and trying to outride something that wasn't the kind of thing you could outride. Don't be, he said. I stayed too long. That's on me. Emma looked at him steadily. You stopped on that road. Emma, you could have kept going. Every other car did. You stopped. A pause. People are what they do, not what they used to do. That's something I decided to believe because otherwise none of this means anything. She looked at her hands. Don't take that away from me right now. Jake looked at her for a long time. Then he said, I'll find the computer, and went into the hallway. He was gone for 8 minutes. When he came back, Emma had already reached the point she needed to reset. She gave him a specific series of instructions with the confidence of someone who had engineered the system carefully and trusted no one else to understand it. And when it was done, she leaned back and let her breath out slowly. 29 hours now, she said. We'll be well inside Tran's timeline, Jake said. His phone buzzed. He looked at it. A text from a number he didn't recognize, 6 words. You should have kept writing, Morrison. Jake showed it to Emma without a word. She read it and her expression didn't change. That's not Dolan, she said. Dolan doesn't send texts. That's someone lower, someone trying to spook you into backing off. She paused. It means they don't know yet that the DEA is in this building. If they knew that they wouldn't be texting, they'd be running. Or it means they don't care, Jake said. Dolan always cares about the DEA. It's the one thing he's genuinely afraid of. Emma met his eyes. Forward that to Tran. Jake did. Within 90 seconds, Tran called him back. The conversation lasted 4 minutes, and Jake said less than 30 words in it, mostly yes and understood. And how long? When he hung up, his expression was hard to read. They're moving the immunity agreement up, he said. 45 minutes, and they're stationing an agent outside this room. Why the change? Because they traced that number. It pinged off a tower 3 miles from this hospital. He looked at her. Dolan's people are already close. Emma closed her eyes. She opened them again. Okay, she said. Okay. She said it twice like she was reminding herself of something. It's fine. Tran gets here. I sign, I give him access to the file, and then it's in federal hands and Dolan has nothing left to gain by coming after me. Except revenge, Jake said quietly. She looked at him. Yes, she said, except that. The 45 minutes that followed were the longest Jake had spent sitting still in recent memory. An agent named Coates arrived outside the door within 15 minutes. Young plain clothes with the careful blank face of someone doing their best to look like nobody in particular. Emma dozed for 20 minutes, the hard, shallow sleep of someone whose body was cashing checks that hadn't been written yet, and Jake sat in the chair and watched the door and did the math on everything he knew and everything he didn't. He thought about Victor, about the fact that Victor hadn't called back since Jake's single sharp call from the lobby. Silence from Victor could mean compliance. He'd passed the message to Dolan and was waiting to see which way it broke. Or it could mean something else. Victor Reyes was a man who had survived 20 years in the Wolves by knowing exactly when to talk and exactly when to go very, very quiet. The trouble was both of those situations produced the same silence. Tran arrived at 51 minutes with a woman Jake didn't know, mid-40s, sharp eyes, a leather folder under her arm. She introduced herself as Assistant U.S. Attorney Carla Medina. She shook Emma's hand with the brisk efficiency of someone who didn't waste motions and pulled a chair directly to the bedside. I've read the briefing, Medina said. I have the agreement here. Before you sign, I need you to confirm 2 things. 1, you have sole access to the file and can transfer it to federal custody today. Yes, Emma said. 2, the contents are what Agent Tran described. 12 years of documentation. Names, dates, amounts, contacts. Yes, Emma paused. And 17 missing persons. Documented. Medina looked at Tran. Something passed between them. Not surprise exactly, but the controlled reaction of professionals receiving information that changes the scale of what they're dealing with. All right, Medina said. She opened the folder. Then let's proceed. Emma read the document. Jake watched her read it carefully, fully, not skimming, running her finger along each line. It took 11 minutes. Medina and Tran waited without rushing her. When Emma reached the last page, she stopped. This immunity covers federal charges, she said. What about state? We've coordinated with the state AG's office. You'll see the concurrent letter on the 3rd page. Emma flipped it back. Read it, looked up. Okay, she said. She held out her hand for the pen. And that was when the lights went out. Not flickering, not dimming, just gone. The full hallway went dark and the room lost everything except the faint ambient glow of emergency lighting clicking on somewhere down the corridor. The monitors stayed on, they had backup power, but the sudden heavy silence of the regular electrical hum cutting out was a sound of its own, and every person in that room felt it in their chest. Outside the door, Agent Coates said, "What the?" and then said nothing else. Jake was on his feet before the sentence finished. He pulled the door open and looked into the hallway. Coates was standing alert, hand inside his jacket. The nurse's station at the end of the hall was dark. Two nurses were standing behind the desk, looking at each other with the universal expression of people who need to know whether this is a routine outage or something worse. Jake turned to Tran. This hospital has a full generator backup. A power cut to a specific floor is not an accident. Tran already had his phone out calling someone. Medina stood and moved to the window. Emma had pulled herself upright in the bed with her hand clamped around the bed rail and her eyes on the door. "Jake," she said, quiet, very controlled. He looked at her. "The pen," she said. "Give me the pen." Medina handed it to her. Emma signed the document in the emergency lighting with the pen moving fast and sure and without hesitation. She handed it back to Medina. "It's signed. Get it out of this building." Tran was still on the phone. His voice was low and rapid. "Jake caught third floor and contained the stairwells, and I need confirmation on the East Wing exit," and that told him enough. They weren't overreacting. This was real and they knew it. "Emma, can you move?" Jake asked. "I can move. Knee and all. Give me something to lean on." He unplugged the IV from its port, not from her arm, just from the bag, and found the crutches the nurse had left in the corner. He brought them to her side. She swung her legs off the bed and he steadied her without being asked to one hand at her elbow, and she got the crutches under her arms and stood. She was pale. Her jaw was rigid with the effort of not making a sound. "Good," he said. "No," she said, "but let's go anyway." Medina was already moving toward the door with the folder pressed against her body. Tran had finished his call. "I have 2 more agents coming up the west stairwell. We're going to move to the second floor and out through the loading exit." He looked at Jake. "You armed?" "No." Tran reached into his ankle holster and pulled out a compact backup piece. He held it out to Jake. "You know how to use it." It wasn't a question. Jake took it. They went into the hallway in a tight group, Tran at the front, Coates at the rear, Jake beside Emma, Medina between them. The emergency lights were on fully now, red-tinted, casting everything in the specific wrong color of crisis. A doctor came out of a room ahead of them, and Tran held up his badge and said, "Stay inside," without slowing down. Emma moved faster than Jake expected. The crutches hit the floor in a quick, hard rhythm, and she kept pace without complaint, her breath coming tight and controlled through her nose. He stayed close enough to catch her if the knee gave, but far enough to let her move on her own terms. They reached the stairwell door. Tran pushed it open and leaned in and listened. From 2 floors below came the sound of footsteps. More than one person. Moving up. Tran pulled back. "Not ours," he said. He looked at Coates. "East stairs, now." They turned and moved back down the hallway in the other direction. Behind them, the stairwell door they'd just been standing at swung open. Jake turned his head without stopping. A man in hospital scrubs, wrong shoes, wrong posture, the specific rigid alertness of someone who was not a nurse, came through the door. He saw them. His hand went to his waistband. "Go," Jake said, and he put himself between Emma and the end of the hallway. The man in scrubs stopped. He looked at Jake. Jake looked back at him with an expression that communicated a very specific set of information about who Jake was, what he'd done in his life, how little he had to lose right now, and how seriously he should be taken. The man's hand stayed at his waistband, but didn't move further. He was calculating. Jake was counting on him calculating. From the east stairwell, 20 feet away, the door burst open and 2 federal agents came through with weapons drawn and announced themselves in the flat, loud voice of authority, and the man in scrubs made his decision. He ran, down the west stairwell, gone. Jake turned and followed Emma and the others through the east door without looking back. 6 minutes later, they were in a federal vehicle in the hospital's loading bay, moving. Emma was in the back seat with Medina, the signed folder between them. Tran was in the front talking on his phone again. Jake was next to him in the passenger seat with Tran's backup piece still in his hand, and outside the windows, the desert light was moving past, and for the first time since morning, the immediate acute danger had pulled back by a degree. Just a degree. Not gone. Just 1 degree. Emma's voice came from the back seat. "Did anyone see who it was?" "The man in the hallway." "No ID yet," Tran said. "We'll get him on camera." "It wasn't Dolan," Emma said. "Dolan wouldn't come himself for this. It was a message." A pause. "He wanted to see if he could get to me before the signing. He couldn't." Another pause. "He knows now that the DEA is involved." "Yes," Tran said. "He does. Which means the file is no longer just evidence. Emma said quietly. It's a timer. He's going to start burning connections before we can use it against him. Tran turned in his seat to look at her. How fast can he move? Emma met his eyes. Fast enough that every hour we spend driving is an hour he's on the phone. She looked at Jake. You said you knew a place. Yeah. Can trans people work from there securely? Jake looked at Tran. Tran looked back at him. Where is it? Tran asked. About 90 minutes from here. No addresses, no records. I've been paying cash for 3 months. Is it defensible? Jake thought about the layout, the single road and the high ground behind it, the distance from any neighboring structure. Yes. Tran was quiet for 4 seconds. Okay, he said. We go there. He turned back to the front and got on the phone again, and Jake looked out the windshield at the road ahead and felt the particular sensation of a current pulling him in a direction he had not planned for and could not now reverse. In the back seat, Emma had her eyes closed. Not sleeping, her jaw was too tight for sleep, her hands too deliberate in their stillness. She was running numbers again, running them hard. Her lips moved slightly, once with something that was not a word so much as a breath, shaped like resolve. Like someone reminding themselves what they were doing this for. Jake didn't ask. He already knew. Some things you don't need to be told. You just recognize them because you felt them yourself, that specific bone-deep determination of a person who has decided that the worst thing that could happen to them has already happened, and everything from this point forward is just the work of surviving it. They drove west. The desert moved past them on all sides, vast and indifferent, and exactly the same as it had always been. And inside the vehicle, 4 people carried the weight of what was coming like something physical balanced between them. None of them quite ready to set it down. The 90-minute drive passed, mostly in silence, broken only by Tran's phone calls and the low hum of the vehicle's engine. Medina worked from her laptop the entire way, fingers moving fast across the keyboard, pausing only to ask Emma a precise, clipped question every 20 minutes or so about dates, names, specific transactions. Emma answered each one without hesitation from memory, with a level of detail that made Tran glance back more than once, with an expression he was almost managing to keep neutral. Jake drove. Tran had offered to drive, and Jake had said no in a way that ended the conversation because this was his road and his territory, and the specific defensive logic of getting to a location you knew required being the one behind the wheel so you could feel every variable the moment it changed. He kept checking his mirrors, not obsessively methodically, every 45 seconds. He'd been doing it since they left the hospital and would keep doing it until they were inside and the door was closed. Nothing followed them, as far as he could tell. Turn here, he said about 80 minutes in. Tran looked at the road, unmarked, unpaved, disappearing between 2 low rises of scrub and rock. This is it. About 3 miles up. Nobody said anything else. The vehicle jostled on the rough surface and Emma braced herself in the back seat and didn't complain about it. When they arrived, Tran got out first and looked at the place the way federal agents look at anything unfamiliar, assessing exit angles, sight lines. Jake watched him do it and read the conclusion in his posture. It wasn't comfortable, but it was defensible. 2 agents who'd been following in a second vehicle pulled up behind them and started doing the same assessment with less subtlety. Jake went to help Emma out of the car. She had the door open before he reached it and was already working the crutches into position. He held the door without being asked and stepped back without hovering. She got herself standing, looked at the place Jake had been living for 3 months, said nothing for a moment. No neighbors, she said finally. Nearest house is 6 miles. And you've been here alone the whole time? Yes. Emma nodded once slowly, the way people nod when information confirms what they already suspected. She moved toward the door without further comment. Inside, Medina set up at the kitchen table within 4 minutes. She had a portable router, a laptop, and the kind of focused efficiency that Jake associated with people who had worked too many cases in too little time for too long. Tran posted his 2 agents, one at the front, one covering the approach from the East Ridge, and then came inside and sat across from Medina. Emma, Tran said, we need access to the file. Emma was on the couch, her knee elevated on a folded blanket Jake had found without asking, her crutches propped beside her. She looked at Tran. The immunity agreement is signed. Yes. Medina witnessed it. Yes. And the terms are binding on the U.S. Attorney's Office as written. Emma. Tran's voice was even. I understand you're being careful. I'd be worried if you weren't. But every hour we wait is an hour Dolan spends destroying what this file proves. We need it now. Emma held his gaze for 3 full seconds. Then she said to Jake, "Can I use your laptop?" Jake got it. She took it without looking at him, opened a browser, navigated to a site that looked to anyone watching casually like an unremarkable cloud storage service for small businesses. She typed a username that was 32 characters long from memory, a password that was longer, then a second authentication code that she entered from a sequence she was clearly generating in her head. A folder appeared, one file inside it. She turned the laptop to face Tran. "That's it." Tran looked at it. He looked at her. "That's everything." 147 pages of documentation. Transaction records, communication logs, scanned copies of signed agreements. She paused. "In the 17 names." Tran took the laptop and brought it to Medina. The two of them bent over it together, and for the next several minutes the room was quiet except for the sound of Medina's fast typing as she began working through what they were looking at. Jake brought Emma a glass of water and sat in the chair across from her. She took the water and drank half of it and looked at him over the rim of the glass. "You're not asking how I built it," she said. "I figured you'd tell me if you wanted to." She set the glass down. "I was a paralegal before I met Dolan. 3 years at a firm in Phoenix that handled white-collar criminal defense. I knew how evidence worked. I knew what made a document useful and what made it inadmissible." A pause. "Dolan never thought to ask what I did before him. Men like him never do. They assume you were nothing before they found you." Jake said nothing. He was watching her face and giving her the space to continue if she wanted to, which she did. "He showed me the ledger about 6 weeks in," Emma said. "I think he was trying to impress me, showing me how untouchable he was, how many people he owned." She looked at her hands. "I sat there and nodded and smiled, and 2 weeks later I had a copy." She looked up. "I didn't know what I was going to do with it. I just knew that information was the only kind of safety I understood." "You stayed another 6 months after you copied it," Jake said. "Yes." That took nerve. Emma's mouth did something that wasn't quite a smile. "It took terror," she said. "Nerve is what you have when you think you can win. Terror is what you have when you know you might not, but you do it anyway." She looked at Tran across the room. "The 17 names, I need to know you're going to pursue those. Not just the financial charges, the people." Tran looked up from the laptop. "That's a separate investigative track. Homicide jurisdiction." "I know what jurisdiction it is," Emma said. "I'm telling you it matters to me, personally, because 2 of those 17 names were people I knew." She held his gaze. A woman named Rosa Garza and a man named Kevin Marsh. Rosa ran a support house in Tucson for women leaving abusive situations. Kevin was a county records clerk who made the mistake of pulling the wrong property transfer and asking too many questions about it. A pause. "They were good people. They didn't understand what they were up against. I need you to understand that when you work this case." The room was quiet for a moment. Even Medina had stopped typing. Tran said, "I hear you." "Do you buy it?" "Yes." His voice was different now, lower, stripped of the professional remove. "I hear you, Emma." She nodded. She looked back at her hands. Jake watched her do the thing he was coming to recognize as her processing motion, the way she went still and inward for a few seconds when something emotional moved through her that she was determined not to show on the outside. Then Tran's phone rang. He looked at it. Something moved across his face, fast, the kind of fast that made Jake straighten in his chair. "Excuse me," Tran said and stepped outside. Jake watched the door close behind him. He looked at Emma. She was already watching the door. "What?" she said. "I don't know yet." "Your face says you think you know." Jake looked at her. "I've been waiting for the other shoe. Since we left the hospital, it's been too clean." Emma was very still. "Define too clean." "One man in the hallway who ran when the agents came. No pursuit on the road here. Dolan's people are not that cautious. They don't send one man and then pull back." Jake leaned forward. "Unless the one man was enough. Unless the one man wasn't there to stop you. He was there to find out where you were going." Emma's face went through several things at once and settled on the specific cold clarity of someone who has just realized that the mistake they made was 3 steps back. Not now. The vehicle, she said. Maybe. Or a tracker, placed while we were still in the hospital. The loading bay, we were there 4 minutes before we moved. That's enough time for someone who's fast and prepared. The door opened. Tran came back in. His face was controlled, but his jaw was doing something tight and specific. He looked at Jake first, which told Jake everything before a word was said. "We have a problem," Tran said. Jake stood up. "How close? Possibly very." Tran looked at Medina. "I need the file transferred to federal servers right now. Not tomorrow, right now." He looked at Emma. "Is there anything in that file that isn't already in the copy you showed us? Any other location, any backup?" "The time lock copy," Emma said. "The one set to forward in..." She checked the time. 26 hours. "Does it go to the same place?" "Different recipients, the journalists." "Can you pull that back? Cancel the auto forward once the primary file is in federal custody." "Yes, but I want to do it myself." "Fine, then here's what's happening." Tran pulled a chair and sat close to both of them, his voice dropping low. "The agent I posted on the East Ridge just reported a vehicle parked about 2 miles out on the approach road. Engine off, just sitting." He paused. "And 20 minutes ago, Victor Reyes posted bond on a DUI charge in Barstow, which means he was being held in Barstow this morning when I was interviewing you at the hospital, and nobody, not Hendricks, not my office, flagged it because nobody connected the name fast enough." Jake felt the floor shift under the logic of it. "Victor wasn't making those calls to warn me off," he said. "He was establishing that he was in custody. Alibi. While Dolan moved independently," Tran confirmed. "Victor knew where I was riding this morning," Jake said. "He knew my route. We used to run it together." He stopped. "He told Dolan." Emma looked at Jake. "Victor Reyes sold you out." Jake didn't answer right away. He sat with that for a moment, not because it was unbelievable, but because believing it required rearranging a set of things he'd held as fixed, and rearranging those things hurt in a way he hadn't predicted. Victor, 20 years, the man who'd pulled him out of a bar fight in Flagstaff in 2004, and handed him a beer and said without preamble, "You're going to get yourself killed doing that." The man who'd stood next to him at 2 funerals and said nothing, which was exactly right. The man who'd been the only one at that vote 6 months ago to look away when it was cast. He'd taken that look away as reluctance, as conscience. He'd been wrong about what it was. "Jake," Emma said quietly. "I'm fine," he said. His voice came out flat and certain. Which was honest, he was fine. Not undamaged, but functional, which was what fine meant in the language he'd lived in for 20 years. He looked at Tran. "The vehicle on the approach road. 1 or more mile, 1 confirmed. Thermal imaging on the agent's scope suggests 2 occupants. And you have 2 agents outside." "Yes." "Where are your backup units?" 40 minutes. Jake did the math quickly. If Dolan's people are sitting on the road, they're waiting for something. Either a signal from inside, which they won't get, or a prearranged time. He looked at the window. Outside, it was going dark, the specific deep blue of desert dusk that turned to full black faster than anywhere else on Earth. "They'll move after full dark, another 20 minutes. Tran nodded. "That matches my assessment." "Then we have 20 minutes to make the transfer, get the file into federal servers, and turn this location into somewhere Dolan no longer has a reason to come. If the file is in federal hands," Medina said from the table, "moving against you becomes an act of obstruction on top of everything else. It doesn't eliminate the motive entirely, but it changes the risk calculation." "For a rational man," Emma said. "Dolan passed rational about 6 months ago when he found out about the access log." She looked at Jake. "He's been running on anger since then, not strategy." "People running on anger make mistakes," Jake said. "Yes," Emma said. "They also stop caring about consequences." Tran looked at Medina. "How long for the transfer?" 8 minutes if the connection holds." "Do it now." He stood and went to the door. "I'm going to reposition the agents and update the approaching units. Morrison, you stay with her." The door closed again. Medina began typing with the concentrated speed of someone who understood that 8 minutes was a hard ceiling. Emma was watching the laptop screen. Jake moved his chair to face the door. The room held its breath in the way rooms do when the people inside them all understand simultaneously that the next few minutes will matter in a way the previous ones did not. 6 minutes into the transfer, Emma said, "Tell me something." Jake looked at her. "Before this morning, before that road, what were you doing out there?" He understood the question, not the logistics of it, but the real question underneath the one she was actually asking. "Running," he said. "From what?" "From the part of myself that knew I should have left years earlier." He paused. "From the fact that I spent 2 decades inside something that hurt people, and walking away from it didn't undo that, and I couldn't figure out what to do with that knowledge." Emma was quiet for a moment. "And now I'm sitting in a room where something I'm doing might actually matter." He met her eyes. "That's new." Emma looked at him for a long moment. "When this is over," she said slowly, "what do you do? Where do you go?" "I don't know," Jake said honestly. "I didn't have a plan past getting away." "Neither did I," Emma said. "Past getting out." She paused. "That's a strange thing to have in common." "Transfer complete." Medina's voice from the table cut through the moment cleanly. "File is in federal servers. Time-stamped receipt is generating now." Emma let out a breath, a long one, like something structural inside her had been holding tension for months and had just been given permission to release. "Cancel the auto forward," Tran said from the doorway he'd come back in silently. "The journalist. Pull it back." Emma took the laptop. "Did it?" Turned it back to face Tran. "Done." "Good." Tran looked at both of them. "Now I need you both to move to the back of the house, away from the front-facing walls. My agents have eyes on the approach road and backup is now 22 minutes out." He paused. "The vehicle on the road started its engine 3 minutes ago." Jake was already on his feet. He helped Emma up, she took the crutches without a word, and they moved to the back room. Medina followed with her laptop. The house felt different now, charged in the specific way that comes before something that cannot be called back. Emma stopped in the doorway of the back room. She turned to look at Jake. "If something goes wrong tonight," she said, "and the immunity agreement somehow doesn't hold, it'll hold. But if it doesn't, Emma," his voice was quiet but hard, "look at me." She did. "It's going to hold. Medina is a USA. The file is in federal custody. The agreement is signed and witnessed and time-stamped. Dolan can't undo any of that." A beat. "All he can do now is make things worse for himself. And if he's dumb enough to come up that road tonight, that's exactly what he's going to do." Emma held his gaze. The thing in her face shifted degree by degree from the constant, calculating fear that had been there every hour since he'd found her on that road toward something harder and more durable. Not peace that was a long way off for both of them, but something adjacent to it. The specific quality of a person who has stopped running and turned to face the thing that's been chasing them. Outside, one of Tran's agents' radio crackled with a burst of static in a single clipped sentence. Jake heard it clearly through the thin wall. "Vehicle moving, coming up the road." Tran's voice came back immediately sharp and certain. "Hold position. Do not engage until I say." Jake looked at Emma. Emma looked at Jake. "Ready," he said. "No," she said. "Let's go anyway." She squared her shoulders on the crutches and stood straight and didn't look at the door or the window or anywhere but directly at him. And in that moment, Jake Morrison, who had spent 6 years telling himself he had nothing worth protecting and no one worth standing next to, felt something settle in his chest with the quiet, permanent weight of a decision made. From the front of the house came the sound of headlights sweeping across the walls, and then Tran's voice calling clear and loud and absolute into the desert dark. And then everything happened at once. The headlights cut through the front windows in 2 hard white beams, and Tran's voice outside rose sharp and clear. "Federal agents, turn off the engine and step out of the vehicle with your hands visible." And for exactly 2 seconds, the world outside went completely still. Then the engine cut. A door opened, and a voice Jake recognized in his bones said, "I'm not armed. I'm coming out slow." Jake's hand tightened on the backup piece Tran had given him. He looked at Emma. She had heard it too. He could tell by the way her face changed, not with fear, but with the specific alert stillness of someone processing a variable that didn't fit their existing model. "That's Victor," Jake said. "I know," Emma said. Jake moved to the front room before Tran could come back inside, and he was at the door when Tran pushed it open from outside, his weapon still drawn, his eyes moving between Jake and the scene behind him. Victor Reyes was standing in front of the truck with both hands up and open and visible exactly as instructed. He was alone. One occupant, not two. The thermal reading had been wrong, or the second person had never been there, or something else was happening that Jake didn't have all the pieces for yet. Victor was 51 years old and looked like he'd ridden hard to get here. His face was road dusty and tight, and when his eyes found Jake's across the dark, something in them broke open in a way Jake had never seen in 20 years of knowing the man. "Jake," Victor said, "I need to talk to you." "You're talking from there," Tran said. "I know." Victor kept his hands up. His eyes stayed on Jake. "I called you this morning because I was trying to warn you. Not for Dolan, against him." Jake didn't move. "From a county jail holding cell. I got picked up at 2 in the morning on a DUI I didn't commit. Dolan arranged it. He knew I'd try to reach you when I found out what he was planning, and he wanted me out of play." Victor's voice was steady, but underneath it something was running urgency and something that might have been shame. "The DUI was bogus and it got dismissed, but it took until 2 hours ago to process out, and by then you were already gone from the hospital, so I drove every road I could think of until I found your bike parked out here." "How did you know about this place?" Jake asked. "I didn't. I knew the general area. You told me once months ago that you'd found a place off 49 where a man could disappear for a while. I drove the approach roads until I saw the truck." Victor lowered his hand slightly. One of Tran's agents moved and Victor put them back up. "I'm telling you the truth. All of it. Whatever you think I did today, I didn't do it." Jake looked at him for a long time. The night air was dry and cool and completely still, and there was no sound from anywhere. No wind, no vehicles, nothing. Just 6 people standing in the weight of everything that had been building since 7 that morning. "If you didn't sell me out," Jake said, "then who did?" Victor's jaw tightened. "Garrett." Emma spoke from behind Jake. "Garrett is in the desert with a cracked skull." "Garrett has a sat phone," Victor said. "He had it before he found you. He called Dolan the same night you put him down. Gave him your direction of travel, your approximate position. Dolan ran plates on every vehicle that came off that stretch of 49 the next morning until he found a match." Victor looked at Emma directly now. "He's known it was Jake since about 11 this morning." "Why didn't he move on the hospital immediately?" Tran asked. "Because he didn't know the DEA was involved until the man in the hallway reported back. Once he knew that, he changed tactics." Victor looked at Jake again. "He's not coming here himself. He sent 2 men, but they turned back 40 minutes ago when they picked up the federal vehicle frequency on a scanner." He paused. "Dolan doesn't fight wars he can't win. He cuts losses." Tran lowered his weapon by a degree, but not entirely. "Cuts losses how?" Victor was quiet for 3 seconds. 3 seconds too long. "Victor," Jake said, "cuts losses how?" "He's already moved the people whose names are in that file," Victor said. "The bought contacts. The deputies, the judges. He started making calls at noon. Some of them are going to be unreachable by morning." Tran turned to look at Medina, who had come to the doorway behind Jake. The look between them was fast and specific, and immediately followed by Medina going back inside and getting on her phone. "How many?" Tran asked Victor. "I don't know exact numbers. I know he was working down a list." Victor dropped his hands fully now slowly. Tran let it happen. "But I also know that 2 of the names on that list refused to run. A federal judge in Albuquerque named Carver and a sheriff's deputy in Tucson named Willits. Both of them contacted Dolan and told him they were turning themselves in." Victor looked at Emma. "Because of you, because of the file. They knew it was over, and they chose to get ahead of it." Emma absorbed that in silence. Jake watched her face process it, the particular way people's faces move when they receive information that is both good and complicated and at the same time. When justice and disappointment arrive together because the justice is partial and messy and nothing like the clean version you carry in your head during the hard times. "Sandra Reeves," Emma said to Victor. "You know that name?" Victor didn't flinch. "Yes." "Then you know what Dolan is?" "Yes." His voice dropped. "I've known for a long time." "And you stayed," Emma said, not with anger, with the flat factual weight of an accountant reading a number. "Yes." Victor looked at the ground, then back up. "I stayed and I looked away and I told myself it was complicated and none of those things were true. They were just easier than this." He gestured at the night around him, the truck, the federal agents, the gun still loosely in Tran's hand, all of it. "This is what the truth actually looks like, and it took me 20 years to stand in it. Jake looked at his old friend, this man he had known in good conditions and bad ones, who had handed him a beer and Flagstaff, and stood at funerals and looked away at a vote and felt something complex move through him. Not forgiveness, not yet. Not judgment either, exactly. Something more like recognition, the specific recognition of one person who has spent too long in a wrong place for complicated reasons, looking at another person who has done the same. Are you wearing a wire? Jake asked. Victor blinked. Then he said no. Take off your jacket. Victor took off his jacket. He wasn't wearing a wire. Jake nodded. Victor put it back on. Then come inside, Jake said. You're going to tell Tran everything you know. Name every operation, every contact list you've ever seen. He paused. All of it, Victor. Nothing held back. Victor looked at him. And then what? And then you talk to Medina about what kind of cooperation agreement you qualify for. Jake held his gaze. You're done with the wolves, tonight, whatever that costs you. A long silence. The desert wind, which had been absent all evening, chose that moment to move through with a low, dry sound that seemed to come from everywhere and nowhere. Yeah, Victor said quietly. Okay. They went inside. What followed was 3.5 hours of the most concentrated information transfer Jake had ever witnessed. Victor sat at the kitchen table across from Tran and Medina and talked. He didn't ask for a lawyer first, which Medina flagged twice, and which Victor dismissed both times with the specific impatience of a man who had made a decision and didn't want the machinery of caution slowing it down. He talked about routes and contacts and internal structure and decision-making chains and the names of people who had made specific choices at specific times. He talked about Sandra Reeves and what he knew about what had happened to her, which was more than he'd admitted to knowing before, and when he said her name, his voice changed in a way that told Jake the name had been living in him like a splinter for 4 years. Emma sat on the couch through most of it. Jake sat near her, and they didn't talk much, but they were both listening, and the listening itself was a kind of shared work. Two people taking in the same information from different angles, each filling in gaps the other had, each reacting in small ways to different parts of it. Around midnight, Tran's backup units radioed that Marcus Dolan had been taken into federal custody at his residence outside Kingman, Arizona. No resistance. 2 lawyers present when the agents arrived, which confirmed Victor's assessment that Dolan had known it was coming and chosen the legal process over flight. Emma heard the news and went completely still. Then she pressed her lips together and looked at the ceiling and took a single long, controlled breath. Are you okay? Jake asked. I don't know yet, she said honestly. Ask me again in a day or two. He nodded. That was the right answer. He respected it. An hour later, Victor looked at Jake across the room with the exhausted, scraped-out expression of a man who has just told the truth about 20 years of his life and is sitting in the unfamiliar quiet of having nothing left to conceal. I'm sorry, Victor said, for this morning, for what I did and what I didn't do. A pause. For a lot of years of a lot of things. Jake looked at him for a moment. I know, he said. It wasn't absolution, it wasn't dismissal either. It was just acknowledgement, the beginning of a longer accounting that both men understood would take more time than one night to complete. What are you going to do? Victor asked. After all this. Jake glanced at Emma. She wasn't looking at him. She was watching Medina organize documents, but something in the angle of her posture said she was listening. I don't have a plan, Jake said. Haven't had one for 6 months. That's not like you. No, Jake agreed. It's not. Victor looked between the two of them, Jake, Emma, the space between them, and something in his face settled into a kind of quiet understanding that didn't need to be spoken. Just past 2 in the morning, Tran called on me over to the table for a final verification step, confirming the contents of the file against Victor's testimony for cross-referencing and evidentiary corroboration. Emma pushed herself up on her crutches and went without complaint. Jake watched her take a seat across from Tran and begin talking with the same clear, detailed certainty she'd had all day. And he thought about what she'd said in the hospital room. People are what they do not, what they used to do. And he turned it over in his mind, the way you turn over a stone that has an unexpected weight to it. He'd done a lot of things in his life that he was not going to be able to subtract. That math didn't change. But today he had also done something else, and that thing was also real, and it was in the same ledger as everything else, and the ledger was still open. That felt, for the first time in a very long time, like enough to work with. At 3:15 in the morning, Medina stood from the table and stretched and looked at Tron and said, "I think we have what we need for tonight." The way she said it, with the particular satisfaction of a prosecutor who has just watched a case that was circumstantial become bulletproof, was its own kind of verdict. Tran looked at Emma. "We're going to need you for a formal deposition in the next 48 hours. I'd like to have protective custody in place for you through the duration of the case, which my office estimates will be—" "I know how long federal cases take," Emma said. "I was a paralegal." Tran almost smiled. "Right," he paused. "You did a remarkable thing, Ms. Reyes, building that file, protecting it, getting it out." Emma looked at him steadily. "My name is Emma Walsh," she said. "Reyes was Dolan, She said it quietly but without softness. "I'd appreciate it if that name wasn't used in any official documentation going forward." Tran nodded. "Understood. Emma Walsh." Emma Walsh. She said nothing more, but Jake saw something shift in her face when Tran used it back. Something like recognition, like hearing your own name after so long being called something else, that it had started to feel like the truth. Shortly before 4 in the morning, Tran's people began packing up. Victor had been formally separated to a second federal vehicle and would be transported to a processing facility in Phoenix, where his cooperation agreement would be finalized. He looked at Jake through the window as the vehicle passed, and Jake looked back, and neither of them raised a hand or changed their expression, but something passed between them that was real, the complicated, unfinished, ongoing reality of two men who had known each other for 20 years and would spend a long time yet figuring out what that meant now. Medina shook Jake's hand at the door. "You're going to get a call from our office," she said. "Your own cooperation will need to be formally documented. What you know about the Wolves' structure, even from years back, it matters." "I know," Jake said. "I'll be available." She nodded and left. Tran stopped at the door last. Morrison. He looked at Jake with the expression of a man who has recalibrated twice in one day and is done being surprised. "For what it's worth, what you did on that road this morning. That's not nothing." Jake said nothing. "Just letting you know someone noticed," Tran said. He went to his vehicle. The engine started, the headlights moved down the approach road and into the dark, and then they were gone, and the desert went quiet in the specific total way it only achieves at 4 in the morning when there is truly nothing left moving in it. Jake stood in the doorway for a moment. Then he went back inside. Emma was still on the couch. She hadn't gone to sleep, even though she had to be running on empty. By now her reserves stretched thin past any reasonable limit. She was sitting with her feet on the floor crutches beside her hands in her lap, looking at nothing in particular, with the expression of someone who has arrived somewhere and is still working out where it is. Jake sat in the chair across from her. They were quiet for a while. The good kind of quiet, not awkward, not tense, but the kind that two people earn by going through something difficult together and coming out the other side still in the same room. 26 hours ago, I was in the desert," Emma said finally. "I thought I was going to die out there. I'd made my peace with it." She paused. "Mostly." "What was the part you hadn't made your peace with?" She thought about it. "That it would have been for nothing. That the file would have gone out on the timer and caused chaos, and maybe some of it would have stuck, and most of it wouldn't, and nobody would have known why I did it or that I did it deliberately." She looked at him. "I wanted it to count for something specific, for Rosa, for Kevin, for Sandra Reeves." She paused. "I wanted it to actually work." "It worked," Jake said. "Yes." She let that settle. "It worked." A long quiet again. Outside, something moved in the brush. A small animal, a night sound, the desert resuming its ordinary business. "What do you need?" Jake asked. "Tonight, right now." Emma looked at him. She was tired, profoundly bone deep. Tired, the kind that comes after sustained crisis finally releases its grip. But her eyes were clear, and in them was something he'd been watching build all day, something that had started as wariness and moved through suspicion and calculation and carefully rationed trust, and had arrived after 17 hours and everything that had happened in them at something that was simply and plainly real. "Sleep," she said, "and to know that when I wake up, someone will still be here." Jake looked at her. "I'll be here," he said. She nodded once. She reached for her crutches, and Jake stood and steadied them without making a production of it, and she got herself to the back room without help, which was exactly the way she wanted to do it, and which told him everything about the kind of person she was and the kind of person she would continue to be on the other side of all of this. He sat back down in the chair by the door. He kept the light on low. He listened to the desert outside, quiet, vast, exactly as indifferent as it had always been, unchanged by everything that had passed through it. And he sat with the specific, unfamiliar weight of a man who had stopped running and found in the stopping not the emptiness he'd expected, but something else entirely. Jake Morrison had spent 6 years looking for a reason to be something different than what he'd been. He'd ridden 3 states looking for it and not found it, and told himself it didn't exist. He'd found it on the shoulder of Highway 49 in the shape of a girl who whispered, "Please don't hurt me," and meant it, and refused to break, and fought her way out of the desert alone, and trusted him with the only leverage she had left in the world. That was enough. That was more than enough. Some men find their redemption in grand gestures, in fire and noise, and dramatic renunciation. Jake Morrison found his in a single moment of stopping, when every instinct told him to keep moving, and in every choice that followed from it, and in the quiet, durable fact that at 4 in the morning, in a house at the end of an unmarked road in the California desert, 2 broken people had made it to the other side of the worst day of both their lives. Not unscathed, not unchanged, but here, still here, and that after everything was exactly what a beginning looked like.